A man was flying first class for the first time. Unexpectedly, when he simply stood up to use the restroom, a flight attendant offered him a small slip of paper with her contact information. After landing, the young man quickly booked a room at a nearby hotel, added the flight attendant's contact information, and texted her his room number. 5 minutes later, the flight attendant arrived with her equipment. Thus, the two had a beautiful encounter. The next morning, the young man opened his eyes to find that the flight attendant had mysteriously vanished. He quickly ran out of the room, searching everywhere. However, the hotel lobby was filled with police. It turned out that the flight attendant's parents had received their daughter's text message asking for help and immediately called the police. The police then retrieved the security footage from the front desk. Everyone was shocked to discover that the murderer had brutally murdered the flight attendant and dragged her body from the room. At that moment, the murderer in the surveillance video turned back and smiled eerily at the camera. The young man was horrified because the murderer in the video looked exactly like him. The flight attendant's mother, overcome with emotion, pulled out a knife to avenge her daughter. The young man never understood how he became a murderer. But just as he died, filled with confusion and resentment, he unexpectedly found himself reborn yesterday, 10 minutes before boarding his flight. He and his traveling friends were waiting for security. He began to cautiously observe his surroundings. Just then, the flight attendant walked past them, just as she had in her previous life. The young man's friend excitedly approached her and asked for her contact information, but she declined. Undeterred, the friend continued to ask what kind of man she liked, saying he could change herself for her. The flight attendant replied that she preferred handsome men who were 1.9 meters tall, had at least a villa in the city center, and a luxury car worth $1 million, and, like her, had never been in a relationship. It was impossible for such a flight attendant to be attracted to the young man. But once the young man sat in first class, the flight attendant was incredibly enthusiastic towards him. But the young man knew clearly that if he wanted to save his life this time, he must avoid any contact with this flight attendant. But remembering how the flight attendant had thoughtfully fastened his seatbelt and gently helped him change into slippers in his previous life, the young man's heart softened. He truly didn't want to watch the flight attendant get murdered, but he deliberately kept his distance from her. No matter how much the flight attendant tried to advance, he coldly rejected her. Seeing the flight attendant still hovering around him, he shamelessly asked her if she was in love with him. The flight attendant frankly admitted that she did find the young man quite nice, a remark that completely irritated the young man. But he suddenly remembered the mate criteria the flight attendant had mentioned when she rejected his friend at the airport. He immediately said he wasn't 1.9 meters tall, but the flight attendant insisted she was around 1.9 meters tall, and that a difference of 30 centimeters would be fine. The young man then said he was a playboy and had had more than 10 girlfriends. But the flight attendant contradicted her earlier statement, saying that men with multiple relationships tend to be more mature, which would complement her perfectly. The young man was speechless, but he really didn't want to have anything to do with the woman in front of him. So he asked the flight attendant if he preferred sweet or savory apple pie. The flight attendant immediately replied that sweet ones were better. The young man immediately said he preferred savory ones, saying their tastes were too different. He and she weren't suitable. Seeing the young man's disdain for her, the stewardess, feeling hurt, wisely turned and left. But thinking of her subsequent tragic death, the young man couldn't bear it anymore and grabbed the stewardess, adding her contact information. He knew that at this point, only by continuing to stay close to the stewardess, as he had in his previous life, could he find the true murderer. After the plane landed, his friends heard that he had added the stewardess's contact information and were filled with envy. A group of them even started